Now, what would you say if I were to tell you that mental health professionals actually consider nonconformity to be a mental illness? And this is something they actually diagnose people with. Alright, so this is called oppositional defiant disorder. Oppositional defiance disorder is a pattern of angry, irritable mood, argumentative, defiant behavior, or vindictiveness lasting at least 6 months as evidenced by at least 4 symptoms of the following categories and exhibited during interaction with at least one individual who's not a sibling. Alright, well that doesn't sound so bad. But then we get to the next part. What is argumentative and defiant behavior? Often argues with authority figures or for children and adolescents with adults. Well, that seems insane. I mean, if the authority figure is wrong, it obviously makes sense to argue with them. So is there going to be any kind of justification for this? Are we going to take into account whether they have a valid reason for arguing? Let's read on. Often actively defies or refuses to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules. Oh, okay. Again, defying authority is a mental illness. Okay, to any thinking person, that should be fairly horrifying. Now, is this one of those mental disorders that just kind of sits around? It was invented a million years ago and nobody really practices it. The answer is no. This mental disorder is enforced. So, for example, my ex was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. According to her, she gave marijuana when she was 13 to a couple other kids, and then they diagnosed her with oppositional defiant disorder, and she had to go on a bunch of medications, and the results were very bad. Now, I definitely do not like my ex. I normally would not be defending her, but I think that in this case, she clearly was not mentally ill. I think this is pretty normal adolescent behavior. And to call someone mentally ill for this is very absurd. We're going to look at this study on the competence of mental health practitioners. Now, this is a very interesting study sent to me by the same psychologist friend. And in this, it really puts a pretty negative light on the competency of mental health workers. So, in this study, what they did is they took a bunch of mental health workers and they slipped them into an asylum and told the staff at the asylum, these guys are insane. And they gave them, a piece of paper saying, this guy is severely schizophrenic. They gave them really serious mental disorders. They're not small things like this guy is mildly autistic. It's like these people are totally loony, right? And what happens at an asylum is every so often they have to do a re-diagnosis. So what the psychiatrist or whatever does is they talk to the people in the asylum and they say, how are you? What are you up to? What's your view on life these days? And they try to determine whether the person still has the mental disorder or not. And the people they slipped in obviously are not insane. In the study, they acted exactly normal as they normally would outside an asylum, and almost all of them were diagnosed as insane. You would like to think that a mental health professional could tell the difference between somebody who is severely schizophrenic and a completely ordinary person, but it's quite likely that they can't. In general, people assume that authority is justified. The reason why somebody is in a position of power is because of meritocracy, and their competence and morality is what got them there. So therefore, any of their behavior is automatically justified by that premise. Now, my friend Tim is a big academic guy, and he knows a fair bit about the history of everything. He probably knows as much as the average historian. And I talked to him about ODD, and this is one of the few things he agrees with me on. He thinks this is a very bad thing to have. Kids should not be diagnosed with this. Adults should not be diagnosed with this. And he gave me some background history. So you see this type of pattern used quite a bit. So for example, in communist USSR, there was a mental illness called sluggish schizophrenia. And this was anybody who disagreed that communism is good was considered mentally ill and institutionalized. And another example he gave me is drapetomania. And this is back when the blacks were slaves in the United States. A black person who wanted to not be a slave and argued with their slave master was considered mentally ill and diagnosed with drapetomania. So this is not something new. This is something that has happened throughout history as well. What do you think? Do you think it's mentally ill to argue with authority? Probably not if you're watching this channel. If you like this video, share it, subscribe. If you have a video request, you can send it to me. I usually do most video requests.